what question am I going to ask if he tells me I want a question? So I started asking like, why is this the case and all this other stuff? And it was really like my son, who was 16, and I started watching, and he's like, he watches all this Rogan and all these other podcasts, and he'll eventually come in and go like, hey Dad, Joe Rogan had a guy on the other day and they were talking about this, and I'm like, hey motherfucker, welcome to 3 years ago. Yeah. I've been telling you that. And so I was like, well, why is that the case? And he was like, Dad, our generation doesn't want to be talked at, but we want to be part of the conversation. And I was like, I don't even know what that means, man.
Yeah, it does not compute.
So, he goes, it's kind of like if you had a podcast. And he goes, and I said, why do you like listening to this? In fact, part of the other part of this story, which I haven't told anybody, and he's in like the shower for a long time. And it gets to the point where my wife's like, you need to go in there and find out what he's doing. And I'm like, I'm not.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Like, this is where we're going to execute the Bohannon call out. Yeah. Right? And I'm like, and eventually, like, so I open the door because he's got a shower or he's got a bathroom in his own bedroom. And I'm like, and I'm hearing these like voices. And I'm like, this is like the weirdest porn I've ever heard. Right? And like, who listens to the, like the actual dialogue as this going on? And he's listening to a podcast. So afterwards, I'm like, dude, were you like listening to like a freaking hour-long podcast like in the shower? He's like, yeah. And I'm like, who does that? Like, what's this fascination with podcasts? And you know what he told me? He goes, Dad, it reminds me when I was younger and you used to take me and I would sit next to all you guys that were in regiment and all your different units and listen to these stories. You'd laugh, you'd make fun of each other. You would tell stories back and the stuff when you were deployed and all this. He goes, and that's what it's like a lot of time. And I'm like, you got to be shitting me, So I'm like, well, maybe we need to do a podcast.
I like it, man.
Right?
I mean, and that's something that affects all cultures and all communities. Like, I feel like people are starved for just good conversation.
Yeah.
You're caught up in your 9 to 5. You're caught up in your commute. Yeah. And then you get home and you got to do this and you got to get the kids to bed.
Yeah.
How often are people just sitting down for hours at a time?
2 inches, sir. Just you.
I need to move? Good?
Yeah, that's good.
But like,
we're good whenever you want.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. No, go ahead.
How the art of sitting down and just talking to other people for an extended period of time, it's lost. It's not part of what people do anymore. But I feel like it's something that people crave, like on a primal level. Yeah. It goes back to like what we were talking about being deployed with your platoon. You sit in a circle with 3 guys and you shoot the shit for hours and hours and hours. Until like you never want to see that person again. You know what I mean? But like the modern lifestyle, we don't get that. Yeah. And I think that's why certain shows are so successful. And that's why I told Andy this. I said, that's why your show is so successful, is because people just feel like they're seated with you guys and they're part of a conversation.
That's right.
And it's not like, there's a lot of podcasts that are very specific to like military or like Jocko's is like, he reviews books, which are great, right? But sometimes you just want to be part of a group of guys that are shooting the shit.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's funny because, my wife goes, she's like, oh my God, I can't listen to this. Cause she's like, it's even worse because you're sitting down and you're telling the same story that I've heard before, and the guys, I know they've heard the story, but they're acting like it's the first time they've heard it.
Yeah.
She's like, so I don't know if I'm watching this like really bad acting or what.
Well, and the story's probably a little better this time.
Yeah. Like, come on, give me some credit. I'm getting better as I tell them. So are we good? I need to move around or we straight?
Good, sir. We're
okay.
recording.
Oh, all right. We'll just splice in some stuff. We'll just let it run. Well, hey, Greg, I really appreciate you taking the time coming out here and visiting the team today here at Lancerland and taking the time to have a conversation with us today.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me. This is fun.
And so, for the team that's going to be listening to this, the way we were able to link up with you is Nick ended up reaching out, and he had mentioned that you actually were on, one of our previous guest podcasts, Andy Stump. And I was wondering if you could share how you met Andy.
So after I made the viral video as a police officer sitting in my patrol car, telling other officers to respect people's constitutional rights, which apparently that's an obscure idea, right? But as soon as Andy saw that video, he hit me up on Instagram and invited me to Montana to do his show. And so that was like May 10th or something. It was like a few days after I posted that video, and flew out there and we did an episode and we just hit it off. He's an easy guy to get along with. We both have like a background in special operations and a bunch of deployments under our belt. So you know how it is when you sit down with a guy that's kind of walked a similar path than you.
Yeah.
It's easy to just start reminiscing and bullshitting and telling stories. And so we burned through like 3 hours in no time. And after I did that show, a lot of people started hitting me up saying, you should do your own show. You should do your own show. And so I started my own. It's called Endless Endeavor. And we're like 4 months into that now. But, yeah, I've been back on Andy's. I did a follow-up a couple weeks ago and went back to Montana, trained some jiu-jitsu, and same thing, just another 3-hour round that felt like it was 15 minutes, you know.
That's great, and you make a great point. He was our first guest, and he really was very gracious in the fact that he's, as you've mentioned before, awesome platform. And the guys that know him because he was prior SEAL, Jessica Lynch Raid, the wingsuit, sponsored by Rogue. But it was really just us having a conversation, and he really helped us kind of ease in. And I remember just sitting down with him before, and I was like, well, hey man, you want to go over like what we're going to talk about? It's like, I'm good.
Yeah.
And he really helped kind of set that tone. And whenever I change out, and I'd love to have him back again, and really thank him, one-on-one in this venue, because he really opened my eyes to what I think you and I were just talking about, as a lot of people are craving for that conversation.
Yeah. No, it's interesting how Andy, like, he never gives himself the credit that he deserves, because he's a master at keeping an interesting conversation. And it's an art.
It is.
But it's interesting that he kind of got you guys started, and then he also got me started.
Yeah.
And then here we are, and we connected the dots.
Yeah, that's pretty neat.
But he told me, he said he already wants to do a round 3 with me, except next time he'll come out this way. So maybe we squeeze in down here and do another one of these as well.
Absolutely. It'd be great to have them both in there. What do you think, Nick?
That'd be cool, sir.
That'd be fun.
That'd be really cool.
Yeah. Just to get an opportunity, I think he might be the first SEAL that we bring into the Lancer Brigade.
Like last, I would imagine.
No. So for those that don't know your background, had some previous experience, you served. So we thank you for your service. We're on the heels of Veterans Day and coming up on Thanksgiving. What and during these times, especially as everybody's kind of going through this pandemic, are you thankful for with your family, and then kind of what you're doing with jiu-jitsu now that you could share with the team?
I'll tell you, and me and Nick were talking about this earlier, I'm thankful that life presented circumstances to me that forced me to draw a hard line. And, everybody thought I was crazy when I said, hey, this is what I believe, and I'm going to stand by that as an officer, because I'm representing the Constitution. Mm-hmm. And through that whole process, it ended up with my life changing trajectory 180 degrees. And I'm no longer in the profession of law enforcement. I have my own show, and a lot more energy can go into my jiu-jitsu academy now. And I can tell you, just in these last 6 months, it's like a weight has been lifted off me. I feel like me and my wife are better. I'm closer with the kids. And I'm able to dedicate more energy into what's more important in life. Because anybody that's part of, any professional career, it takes a substantial amount of your time and your energy. And, people always say on their deathbed, what's the one thing people never say? I wish I'd worked more.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And now I just recently turned 40, and I'm realizing, like, the whole set of circumstances that kind of played out has allowed me to put myself in a position where I get to focus on what's more important. And it's weird. Like, I literally have less stress, less aches and pains. Like, you guys know, putting on that battle gear every day and walking around with body armor, and like, it just starts to take a toll on you physically. But mind, body, and spirit's all connected. It starts to take a toll on you emotionally too. And I don't know what the right answer is for cops, but I feel it's like a 5 to 10 year career, because once you go past that, I always tell people, I don't know one police officer that's been in the profession more than a decade that's not disgruntled. Mm. And then what are you doing with your life at that point? Because they'll be like, we got 10 more years till retirement, so I'm just going to suck it up. And it's like, I don't know if that's the best option,
Yeah. Absolutely. The other thing too, we've had previous guests, and this is kind of like this month to salute service and recognize those that have served. and we have this strong connection with our community. So they've done a proclamation for Veterans Day. But I think it's just the opportunity, and just in the small time that we got to chat in my office, it's just this experience that you have and being thankful to be part of something that you may not even recognize how special it is until you turn 40, you know, and you recognize, and as you have this perspective. And I was talking to a guest a couple of days ago, and what they mentioned was, I'm just thankful for having the opportunity to serve, right? You're part of something, you know, that's so small. And as you and I talked about, you know, stats, you know, about 3 years ago, it was like 18 to 25-year-olds, only about 40% were even physically and mentally capable of even being able to put on or enlist in the Army. And I know, you know, when you go through this portion of this, it's just to have the opportunity to be a part of something that you have this shared common interest and purpose. How important it is, you know, for your experiences when Veterans Day comes around, do you still have that connection with those that you'd serve with?
Oh, I think it's a lifelong connection. That's one of the most important aspects of who I am as a person.
Yeah.
I talk about this all the time, is that as human beings, we have this tribal need for camaraderie, right? Like, sure, there's some guys that go live in the Arctic tundra by themselves, but those are outliers, right? Like, we need our community. We need to feel love. We need to have people that we know would defend us and have our back. Like, all this stuff is a primal need.
That's right.
And I feel like a lot of people in today's society, they don't get to experience that firsthand. But when you put yourself in a position where you're growing up in a Ranger platoon as a 19-year-old, and you do have to rely on people, and you do have to count on people, and the guys to your left and right, you know, would defend you with their life, and likewise, you would do it for them. It creates a bond that I think is a very natural experience as a human being, but I feel like our society is moving farther and farther away from that. And that's a problem. You know, I think that connection that you feel in the military is something that is provided through the military, but is lost in a lot of other aspects of life now. And that's why you always hear, like, all military leadership will tell you, the relationships you built in your platoon will be the best relationships you've had your entire life. Like, how many times have you heard that in the military?
Absolutely.
You know? And, you know, I do think that once you learn how important relationships are and how important camaraderie is, you can start to find that in other aspects of your life. And so, like we talked about in your office, my jiu-jitsu team is what fills that void now.
Yeah.
And I'm fortunate that I got to be raised in the regiment where it taught me about the importance of that, you know?
Yeah. You know, even for those that just, you know, that first time that you're in a team or in a squad, you're in a platoon, those that you're going through some type of hardship, adversity together, you're growing, you know, and you recognize that, as you and I have talked about, in order to go through growth, you have to be able to recognize your own shortcomings, right? And so one of the first times you're going to see that is at PT. Like, hey, I'm not very good at, you know, lifting. I'm not very good at running. I'm not very good at this. And those that are going to make sure that this is a team event, they're going to come back and they're going to say, hey, let me help pick up this weight as you're going through this. But then you also mentioned this piece, you know, about conversation, camaraderie, and it's the same thing I think that we take for granted, you know. Even for those as you get senior in your organizations and in leadership positions, I will always see the same comment that says, I struggle with balance, you know, and it's not the, you know, proverbial, you know, fulcrum that, hey, I can balance my family and my professional career. You've got to really know what priorities are, you know, in those that are providing you that unconditional love and support in your network, right?
Yeah.
And when I was growing up with, you know, or my kid was growing up, like, I could be dad of the year by just taking him to McDonald's and throw him in the ball pit and buy him some fries. Like, that's not going to cut it, you know, today. And so what I offer here, right? And so guys will end up, I will end the day at 1600. And the reason why I think that's important is because, you know, some guys will call it, hey, it's family time. Hey, it's to go home because it's getting dark outside and it's preventing the mad rush. You know, like running the bulls in Pamplona toward the gates. But really, if you're waking up before the rest of your family is up to get ready to go to school or something like this, maybe the only opportunity you have is the chance to sit around a dinner table and share a conversation about how the day went.
Yeah. No, it's important, man, for sure. You know, I think a lot of people, like you said, need to balance that. And the reason it's so confusing is because there's no cookie cutter answer of what's going to work.
Exactly.
Every family's dynamics are different. Every family's needs are different. And like you said, if you take your son to McDonald's, he's cool, right? Somebody else's son might require something completely different.
Exactly.
And because there is no cookie cutter approach to how to balance it, how do you teach that? You know, it's a difficult thing for leaders to do.
That's right. You know, and what I've found is it's the challenging part. I've mentioned this before, and it varies in your life. You know, so it starts off when it's just you. It's pretty easy to lay out what your priorities are. It's whatever I want. I'm hungry.
That's
Go get
right.
something to eat, right?
Yeah.
I want sports, ESPN. I want alcohol. And then now you're in a relationship. And then you come home and then that person doesn't tell you exactly what they want at the moment they want it. And they're expecting you to demonstrate some effort to read, or even worse, like, which we're not very good at, is listen, you know? And then I go back and I'm like, what are you upset about? You know, I'm asking my wife, like, why are you angry? And I'm like, I'm trying to figure out in my mind, I'm going through the order. And it took me a little bit. I was like, wow, I walk in, you know, I play with the dog, I turn on ESPN, I get a beer, and then I ask her how her day is. And in her mind, she's seeing these actions continually. And so she's seeing I'm number 4 out of all these things that are going on that you got to figure out.
I always tell people, I said, being a stay-at-home dad is 100 times harder than being an Army Ranger. You know, and people laugh about that. But here's the thing. Being a Ranger, okay, it can be emotionally hard.
Yeah.
It can be, obviously, it's physically hard.
Yeah.
But it's all, the expectations are pretty clear.
Yeah.
Most of your problems, you have a solution to.
Yeah.
And even if it's, hey, we're going to set an OP on that mountaintop and it's 17 clicks away and you're walking all night under nods and it's like, okay, all this might suck, but the expectation is very clear. I know what needs to be done. I know how I need to do it. And now it's time to execute it. And that's an easy mindset to adopt as a young Ranger. Whereas, so when I initially got out of the military and left the contracting world, we had our first daughter, and I stayed at home for a couple years, knocking out my degree while my wife worked. And I remember just holding the screaming thing. I'm not even gonna call it a baby because like it was just like this. It was like a pet. You know what I mean? There's no interaction. It's just problem solving.
Yeah.
But 9 times out of 10, I couldn't figure out what the solution to that problem was. And it puts you to a point where it's like just constant frustration. You're disgruntled, you're angry. And it made me have to sit back and reflect. It's like you came from a world where having the solutions was something that you prided yourself in. And now as a new father, you don't have the solutions to anything. It's like a clean slate. You're starting over.
That's
you
right.
know? And so, yeah, I always found that interesting because it's exactly what you said. Like the soldier aspect of being a soldier, it builds you and it does a lot of things for who you are as a person to build and grow and those relationships. But when you step outside of that, there's a whole lot more to life that you have to dissect.
Yeah, you know, I think we crave structure, even though we say we don't, right?
100%.
Right.
Creatures of habit.
Exactly. Creatures of habit, predictability, routine. You know, as much as we're like, there are days, I mean, and I want everybody to know, like, there are days, like, I'm 44, that I'm like, ugh. Like, there's days I don't want to do PT, but I know, just like we've talked about it, because we know our bodies and we've gone through this, that if I don't do PT, I know it's going to be worse.
Yep.
So if I don't run for 3 days, I can feel this, right, as I'm going through. But you're right. There's no instructional manual when you become a parent.
No.
You know, there's no instructional manual about when you're developing these relationships. And so for what I want everybody to understand is, you know, when you come into the Army, it doesn't matter if you're officer or enlisted, the things that you learn, the things that you're taught, the things that are imparted upon you and the hard challenges that you go through every day, they will give you the confidence, you know, that when you encounter something that you've not seen, like what I call like the time terrorist, when my son, you know, was young like that and he seemed like he cried all the time, you're going to find that extra ounce of patience.
Yeah.
You're going to find that compassion to find a way to, how do I build some routine and structure back into this? I'm going to find a way how I can help, you know, a burden. If I'm not the one that can help during feeding time, what is it that I can help with, you know, during this portion of this? And I think that, you know, those that may not understand when they walk in that says, hey, why am I doing this? Why are we doing this hard stuff every day? I think it's because as we talk about it, you don't realize we're teaching you life skills.
Yeah, for sure. No, I mean, again, we talked about in your office is like anything worth having in this world comes through adversity.
Absolutely.
Anything.
Absolutely.
Your intelligence, your physicality, your relationships. Like, in order to grow stronger in any of those departments, you have to walk through adversity. And the military forces you to understand that adversity makes you grow.
That's right.
You know, and
That's right.
it both physically and emotionally. You know, getting smoked as a new private. Or hazed. I don't know if they can do that anymore. Whatever you want to call it.
We call it hard hugging. We call it hard hugging and development. That's what we call it.
Yeah, but no, that's and I always tell young men, especially because a lot of guys that are part of my jiu-jitsu team will ask me that because they're reaching the age where they're now kicking around the military as an idea. And I think it builds one of the best foundations, regardless if you want to do a career or if you just want to do one enlistment. It's going to build a foundation that'll carry you the rest of your life, no matter what route you want to go.
I think that's great advice. You know, when I was growing up, and we talked a little bit about dads, and I know we'll go back to that subject, but you know, my dad was one of 4 boys that served in the military, and my grandfather served as well. And so he got to see the opportunities, you know, the adventure, camaraderie, experiences he got to see in the military. And he really looked at it as there's a lot of things that the military afforded us. And he sat us all down and he said, hey, I really appreciate if you guys would find some way to give back service. Mm-hmm. And so whether it was, hey, do ROTC, you could go to West Point, you enlist for a couple years. And so we all had that conversation, and the 3 boys all ended up going into the service as well. But I have to agree with him, you know?
Yeah. And there's so much opportunity now. Like, a lot, like, his name's Zach. He's a family friend of mine who's in the process of enlisting in the Air Force. And, you know, knowing me and my background, everyone's like, well, is he going to be a Ranger? I was like, no, he's actually looking at the fire service in the Air Force, you know, because his goal after that is to be a fireman.
Yeah.
And so any path that you want to take, you can look at military service and include that into your path to make you a more sought candidate in any profession.
Absolutely.
I have a friend that she became a doctor through the military. You know, you can do anything you want and use the military as like a stepping stone to get to where you want to be. Yeah. And then you're not straddled with debt, and you actually get like, you improve your resume. There's a million things that come along with service, even if it's just looking long term. You know?
Yeah. I think that, you know, as you mentioned, and we were talking about it, you know, it regardless of whatever your competency and your specialty skill ends up being, you know, what you don't even realize you're getting as you walk along this path in the journey of the profession of arms, you're getting this experience on how to build teams, work with, you know, a diverse background of individuals. And then they're teaching you leadership experience that's going to be heavily sought after, you know, when you go into the civilian world.
Yeah. No, I think leadership is one of the biggest shortcomings in the civilian world. I mean, that's why Jocko's stuff is just blowing up. Because if you look at what Jocko teaches, I mean, it's all good stuff. I look up to Jocko. I read his books. But at the end of the day, it's a lot of basic military leadership stuff.
Absolutely.
Shoot, move, and communicate.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That you learn as a private. But if you can apply those lessons to the civilian sector, it's huge. You know?
Yeah, it'll turn into profit, right? So I always, and then when you get to the next level, right? So it's understanding the basics and the priorities are going to put you on this path, right? So you get these values set. It's this work ethic they're teaching you. It's these priorities to help put you on the right path. And then you become a leader, and we start teaching you some like organizational leadership skills. So what, you know, direct leadership is, and like kind of 3 to 5. And then as you work through on it, how do you develop processes and procedures and come up with paradigms, concepts, and models, right? That will, at some point, all will be flawed at some portion and some will work. And then so a lot of times, you know from your experience in working in special ops, and then even as a police officer, you'll see a problem set that you may have never experienced or they have never given you in training, but you will have seen something, or you may have a model or a way or an approach that may work. And then even if it doesn't, you'll go back to something else because that's kind of the ability that they've taught you.
Yeah, for sure. Do you think your capabilities as a leader were more honed as a lower ranking officer, where you're having more intimate relationships with the guys? Or do you think it was honed more where you had more responsibilities and more people under you?
So I think the first portion, what I would offer is, I think that the foundation of the type of leader I am, on what I emphasize on the importance of things came from really NCO investment. You know, so NCOs that looked at me and said, "Sir, this is important. Pay attention.
Yeah.
Sir, hey, you need to know this. Hey, your soldiers are going to expect you to understand and speak about this." And that's the thing that even to this day I will remember. I mean, that's why you go back and I remember the lessons and some of the discussions I've had from my very first platoon sergeant in the Army. And it's actually the same reason why I'm still close friends today with a lot of non-commissioned officers who are now retired.
Yeah.
And I think one of the greatest, I mean, touching and honors to have is when a non-commissioned officer, pulls you aside and says, "Hey, sir, I can't wait to see you come back and be a commander, or anywhere you want to go, you let me know, and that's the unit I want to go to." Or even more touching is when you have a non-commissioned officer who's a Ranger first sergeant ask you to officiate his retirement ceremony. So I think,
Because that shows you got respect from the guys.
Absolutely.
And that's what it's all about.
Absolutely. It's not about the accolades. It's not about what's written on your evaluation reports, right? So, it goes back. It's the downfall of a leader is what's written and said about them, good or bad, and they start believing it. So believe in your own press, right?
Yeah.
So, to go back, I think that's where you get your experience about what do I need to focus on the right thing, so as you become an organizational leader, you never lose that touch. I think the hardest part about as you become senior is, can you take these concepts? Can you take strategic guidance, operational guidance, and then can you take this and make sure it can message and communicate so somebody, at the lowest levels can understand in a language and terminology that goes, okay, I understand exactly what the purpose is. I know where he wants to go. The same thing that you said. When I was in a Ranger squad or team, it was very clear what the expectations were, right? That's what I feel that you need to have as a leader, especially as an officer. If you're this, "Hey guys, I'm kind of thinking about this," and they come back and they're like, "Well, I don't really know what it's going to be until I'll know it when I see it." That's you.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'd rather just go back and go and say, "Hey, I have no idea, but here's what I think that we should do. And this is what and then ask for input. Surround yourself with those that have the experience. And if you're not comfortable doing that when you were younger, when you're flying as close as you could to the sun, you're not going to do that when you become a senior
it's not
leader.
just going to arbitrarily happen one day.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because at some point, right, John Chung walks out of the military. No one's going to care what rank they were, or he was when he was serving in. And I may have to be working with somebody who's 20 years younger than I am, goes, "Hey, Chung, you're not doing that correctly. Come here, man."
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, roger that,
Yeah. No, it's interesting to hear kind of the officer side, because I was never, I was an NCO, but I also was only, I was an E5. I had a team under me. I don't have this vast leadership experience. But one thing that I've kind of learned over the years is that if you hone your leadership with the mindset that you're caring for your guys and you want them to know that.
Yeah.
And I learned that as a private on the opposite end of that, is like, I got a team leader that I realized, like, oh, this guy has my best interest in mind and he has my back. And once you kind of have that belief in your leadership, like, those guys will walk through hell for you, and that goes all the way up to the top.
Absolutely.
Like, your privates, like, hey, Colonel Chung, he has our back.
Absolutely.
And he's in our corner. And if your guys have that, you're unstoppable, I share a story about, like, a profound moment in time when it comes to leadership. And it was, I was a private in the Ranger Regiment, and I had a team leader. And like I talked to you about in your office, they would come in at 2 a.m. drunk and start low crawling, do fucking duck walks up and down the platoon AO. And that didn't gain him any respect. Like, we didn't look to that guy as like, oh, wow, what an amazing NCO, right?
Right.
All the privates would talk shit about him. They would talk about how much they hated him. But this was peacetime. This was pre-9/11. And so he ended up ETSing, and we got a new team leader. And I'm friends with him to this day. His name's Sergeant Arredondo. And I don't even remember what we messed up as privates, but we fucked something up. And he came into the squad room, And you could tell he was upset with what we had done, right? And so we're like, okay, we're all going to get smoked now. But who cares? We get smoked all the time. Like, that's just part of being a Ranger private. Like, it doesn't faze me. Smoke me for the next 2 hours. Tell me to fill my 2 quart 5 times. You know what I mean? Like, it got to the point where that didn't bother the privates in the squad. And he goes, everyone sit down. He walks in and he goes, hey, what you did out there reflected poorly upon yourselves. And I'm part of your team now. So when you do something that makes this team look bad, it makes me look bad. I don't want to be part of a team that looks bad. Do you guys understand? Fix it. And walked out. And we're like, whoa. It was like a knife to our hearts. I remember, I mean, the privates that were in that room with me, I'm friends with all of them to this day. And we were looking at each other like, what just happened? You know? And that was a very pivotal moment because he didn't put himself up here and put us down here.
Yeah.
He came in there and said, hey, we're all on this team together.
Yeah.
And we have to succeed together.
Absolutely.
And it was like a profound moment for me. And I remember like thinking, when I become an NCO one day, that's how I'm going to run my team. I want my guys to feel like we're in this together. And I feel like I did that, you know? And again, it's like I mentioned to you before we started recording, all the privates that were part of my team, I could text them right now. I've maintained relationships with them 20 years later. So for me, that kind of validates that I did something somewhat right. You know what I mean? Like, if the guys still care about me as a person all these years later, that's pretty cool, you know?
I think that's a great point because, you know, when you talk this care portion of this, the thing I think that was the most impactful where you learn the lessons to be more of a senior leader on what's prioritization and how to work the communication and messaging is at the direct level, right? So it's working every day. You're seeing what you're putting out and you can see the reactions on faces. They're going to know. So what you were talking about is, do they understand and do they have your back? You're talking about this currency of our profession, which is trust, you know, and it doesn't matter what position you are. And some people will say, hey, it's a little bit more difficult at the direct level versus, you know, as you work up in the strategic level. I think it's something that you should always be constantly, how am I increasing the value of trust and the currency of this profession in whatever I'm doing? And I think the easiest way that I would offer anybody is it really starts to like, hey, if I say that this is what I'm all about, but that you don't see it in my actions and behavior, so it looks like it's not aligned. I'm not leading by example.
Service.
That's exactly right. If I say, hey.
And privates see through the bullshit.
They see it.
They see through it immediately.
Your kids see it.
Yeah, exactly.
They're the greatest ones, right? Like, so my son could care less like what I do. You know, he's like, I don't tell my friends like what my dad does. They don't care, blah, 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 blah. He just wants to know, hey, you know, like if I'm getting on him and he's like, hey, the reason why I'm getting on you is you told me that you did your best, then we'll stop having this conversation.
Yeah.
But if you didn't, I think you can do better. Mm-hmm. And if it isn't, then tell me where you think I failed you, because then I'll work on it. You know, in the moment you have a conversation very similar to like, you know, your team leader had with you, that's one of those moments of like, okay, roger that, you know, because as you're exactly right. We're all in this boat, you know, swimming up this thing called life together, like grab a paddle and let's get after it.
Yeah. And then the other big profound shift for me was 9/11. You know, for me, 9/11 was my last day of Ranger School. So I was down at Eglin Air Force Base. We were putting on chutes to jump back into Fort Benning. And Cadre came out and said, hey, D-Rig, throw all your chutes in a pile over there. Come into the auditorium. We have something to talk about. And we went in there, and sure as shit, everybody instantly knew we're going to war.
Yeah.
This is going down,
yeah.
You know? And it was interesting being part of a military where, I mean, I was with the regiment for, I don't know, 2 years and a half or something. And everybody said they wanted to go to war, and everybody talked about war, and we trained for war. But who really believed in their heart, like, oh, no shit, we're going? You know? And there was some guys that's like, it's going to happen. I know it, you know? Yeah. Our company commander, his name was Captain Donahue, who's a stud. And he used to say that to us. He's like, Rangers, make no mistake about it. 50% of the men standing before me will fight in combat. History repeats itself. It can't go any other way. You have to believe that. And it's like he's Nostradamus or something. I think about that speech to this day because I was like, as he was saying it, everyone's like, you know, the Ranger Regiment hadn't done anything since Mogadishu.
Yeah.
Here we are 7 years later, but sure as shit. And I think that's an important thing for young leaders to realize is like, you're in the profession of arms, and just because you haven't been part of the last whatever op tempo or rotations, and your day's probably coming.
Yeah.
And even if it doesn't come, you have to be in the mindset that it is coming.
Yeah.
Because for me, that changed the whole structure of the relationships with other Rangers
That's
and
exactly
how
right.
leadership treated each other and how things were disseminated. Everything changed after 9/11 because it became immediately apparent I might have to rely on this person with my life. And that nobody gives a fuck about your rank at that point.
That's exactly right.
Who is this person as a man? What is he willing to do for me? What am I willing to do for him? And I think that's an important thing. Like with your battalion now, is there NCOs that have not been deployed downrange?
There is.
So, I mean, we're now getting back into that.
That's exactly
where
right.
you're getting leadership that doesn't have combat experience. And I don't necessarily think going to combat makes you the greatest thing since sliced bread. It's all a crapshoot, who goes where, and also what they do while they're downrange.
That's true.
But I do think it shifts the mentality.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's an important mentality to try and capture and impart on your NCOs. Because if they know, okay, I'm probably going downrange with these guys, you're going to approach how you mentor them and how you lead them and how you train them a little bit differently.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's interesting when you share your story. So I got commissioned in '98. So I joined an army at the same time, right? That was not going to go to war, or there was nothing on the horizon at that time. And it was train, hey, for, the balloon to go up, and we were going to get this call. And I remember being in the field, prior to 9/11. So it was the night before, and we were on this field problem. And I had my platoon out there. Actually, at that time, I was a company XO. And I remember walking out there, and this, when you talk about those that have served in combat before, and the approach and mentality and how they're treating and how they're raising you. So my first two battalion commanders, one was Bob Brown. I've spoken about him before. Just phenomenal team builder, leader. I mean, just incredible. And then the one that I attribute all my combat focus, my approach, and this guy, I was like, this guy is crazy. Everything he talked about was going to war and all this. It was J.B. Burton, and he was a company commander and led one of the first elements in the Gulf War. Silver Star company ended up clearing a bunker complex of Iraqi soldiers in Mutla Ridge. I mean, killed 100. I mean, and so we talk about that ground war, but it's so short period of time, and exactly what you said. Some people that went and what their experience is. This guy came in, and everything he talked about was about preparing to go back to combat. And so as we had this approach, just the way he talked with us, the focus on LPDs, I mean, and I just remember how difficult, it was to brief this guy because he was so intense. And it's it's hilarious, right? Because to this day, his call sign was Lancer 6. So when I took this job and ended up, keying the hand mic and saying, "Hey, so and so, this is Lancer 6," I freaked myself out, I'm become my own boss, from the past. And so as we're listening to this and going through this portion of it, I could remember, the same way you talk about, then Captain Donahue, I could remember, my boss, J.B. Burton at that time talking in an LPD, about essentially how to fight through this city. And I was like, what are we talking about? When is this ever going to end up happening? All this going on. And so we're out in the field. I'm a company XO. And this is a week prior to that. This is a guy that, he would bring you in. And of course, it had all these Bradleys and they were all over the place. And this assembly area just looked it was horrible. Right. And I was just let's hope that we get everything kind of in order before he comes out. But sure enough, he was out there. And he came out there and he was like, "Hey, John, what's going on here?" So, sir, we're working through, our priorities of work. I'm trying to give him the good standard lieutenant answer. And clearly he knew that I was like, oh God, my battalion commander just showed up at the worst time. And so he sits there and he pulls out a 5x8 card and he starts giving me a class, about how this approach and going through. He's teaching me. And so as he's teaching me, I'm looking around and I see the sun going down. And I'm like, oh, thank God. We're not going to move. We're just going to end up like, he's going to give me the class and we're going to be like, we'll fix it in the morning.
Surprise.
Surprise. And he's like, okay, we got it? And I said, oh, yeah. Yes, sir. He's like, all right, you got 30 minutes to move. And I'm like, oh, God. And so now he went from teaching mode to as I'm now moving out the quartering party, doing all these approach, right? And establishing the apex is just like a patrol base and all this. Like, he's on the radio. I don't know where this guy's at. He's on some terrain feature watching this and just constantly getting on me on the radio. And I'm like, this guy's like all over me. And so I remember this specific, experience. And then a week later, we're out in the field as a company XO. And he was on me because guys weren't pulling security. Guys didn't have this approach. And it was just like, hey, you're not going to recognize this until later on. Mm-hmm. He goes, and then everything that you have, every moment to squeeze and teach, everything that they're going to remember is there, and have an opportunity to apply. And so I came upon a checkpoint, and all these guys were sleeping, and gave them a little bit of a hard time, right? Put them in the thing. And then 9/11 happened, and then it became completely different. And it was the same thing. All those were talking about going to war and all this. And what I would share to those who have not been to combat that feel like they're missing out on something, right? And I joined the regiment in 2005, right as things were starting to really pick up, and stayed in the soft community till the the end of 2014. But I would tell guys is like I've seen both sides of this. Those that were waiting and thought they were going to miss something out and be on the very beginning of this. And then now I'm starting to see where, hey, these rotations now, after being 17, 18, almost going on 20 years, right, of doing this, it's like now you're going to end up starting to see guys that, have missed out on this thing, or it's a completely different mind shift, I just say.
Yeah.
But I would tell them, I was like, be careful what you wish for, because I've also seen it on the side as those that continually deploy. I've done it both on the conventional and the soft time. And I'm sitting here now over 60 months deployed, and there's other things. And it makes you look you'll look at life completely different. The relationships you talked about, those that you're serving with, those you can rely on, those at home, your appreciation of what you have, with your family.
For sure.
All that's different. And then it goes back to once you go over there, you're bringing things back with you that you have to unpack.
And I think combat was fun. That's one thing that I always tell people that's kind of like, they'll look at you kind of sideways. It's like,
no, it's true.
No, it's a good time.
It's true.
Because it's like, it's competition and the stakes are at the highest that they could ever possibly be, right?
That's right.
And like young men, that's exciting to them. But the other side of it is, like you said, the guys that are doing it for 2 decades, like that starts to become their identity. Mm-hmm. And I've talked to a lot of my unit buddies that, they're now approaching retirement age because they're in their 40s. And there's a common theme talking to those guys. They're like, man, I realized I gave my whole youth to the war, and at the time it was exciting. And it was like the whole range of emotions and getting to do cool missions and doing raids in northern Syria and stuff. But now they're looking back and they're reflecting as like, should I really have given my entire life to that?
Yeah.
Because it goes back to the balance thing. There was no balance in that life. It was just go, 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 go. And it's not until they kind of detach and unplug and look back on it and they're like, whoa, that's been my entire adult life is fucking doing missions. It's a weird thing.
It is.
But most of my buddies that stayed in have come to that realization, like, was it worth giving my entire life to this? And not to say that it was good or bad, but it's a conversation you're going to have with yourself at some point.
Absolutely.
I
think that you're going to have these bonds, right? You'll never question the camaraderie and the bonds that you have. And I'd tell you the same thing, right? It's exciting.
Yep.
You're going to have this shot of adrenaline, and we talked about the chemicals in the brain and how all of them get affected differently. But you're going to experience something, and when you come back, you're going to crave it.
Yep.
And there's nothing that's going to match it. No live fire, no jumping out of airplanes, any of that stuff. But then at some point, when you do it for so often, and you start to become a little bit numb, and you got to ask yourself, and it's really, really hard, right? It goes back to, the part we were talking in my office. Nobody wants to ever say, as we talked about at the beginning, this is what I'm struggling with. This is my shortcoming.
Yeah.
You are going to come back, and you're naturally going to have, when you see things that, the human mind really shouldn't see, but they see it up close, you're going to bring some of that trauma back, and you're going to find different ways that you're going to unpackage that.
No, and that's something that like, I appreciate how you said every single one of us that's been downrange to some degree, because I think the biggest thing that we need to impart on people is that if you're feeling this at all, you're no different than anybody else.
That's exactly right.
We're all going to take part of this home with us. Now, some guys will unpack it and they'll find like negativity comes out of it as they go into depression or addiction or all the negative things that can come from it. Some guys will unpack it and become better people. They'll become stronger. They call it like PTSG, post-traumatic growth, you know?
That's right.
And so there's no cookie cutter response to how this is necessarily going to affect you. But guess what? It's going to affect you. And the sooner you realize that and the sooner you kind of accept that, then that allows you to have the tools to kind of navigate through it and be more successful. I mean, I've seen it a million times. I'm sure you guys have too, is that the guys that just bottle it up and I'm good, those are the guys that are just, it's like putting it in a pressure cooker.
That's right.
You know? And it's funny that it takes turning 40 before you're willing to kind of be vulnerable, you know? Because when you're 25 years old, you just feel like you're invincible. Yeah. And showing any vulnerability, that's just being a bitch, you know? like we said, the Ranger fucking slogan is suck it up and drive on.
Yeah.
Everything about that's just don't be a pussy.
Yeah.
We're going to go hard and get after it.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think that's the part about this evolution, right? So when we go back and we start talking about how we were raised and dads and the strong and silent type and, you know, how do you communicate and stress and message to your guys today, you know, that you love your soldiers? Because it goes back to that same thing when you realize that they're leaders that you're working for and those that you're working with alongside, that there's this level of commitment that you just can't even explain, this bond that you've built, then through their actions and behaviors. And we've talked about it on a couple of past episodes. It's really about building a network, right? It's a network of resources, professionally, personally. So, I mean, if you had a challenge right now, all those that were in your team, you know, if your wife reached out, they would all rally. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, and it's the same thing, you know, you don't realize that as this network that you're building and what I would offer to anybody that has been in combat it's bottling that stuff up is, you know, I would share like just for me to open up and be transparent about my own experiences. Have I been scared? Absolutely. You know, was there times that I thought that like I had to fight my way out of this and there was a thought that I may not go back? Absolutely. You know, and when I came back, was I changed? Yeah, my wife will tell you, right? I remember when all you wanted to do was sit in this dark room, watch football, you know, right, and drink beer.
Uh-huh.
And I didn't come realizing to me until my son, like we were looking at pictures in the past, and he's like, "Dad, when was this?" And I said, "What do you mean?" "When was this when you were big cheeks?" And I'm like, "What?" Freaking kid is like, you know, like 12 years old dropping some radical candor. And my wife's like, "Oh yeah, that's when Daddy would sit in there and just drink beer and watch football." And I'm like, that was before we were married, I think, you know?
Yeah. That's funny, man.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting as we're talking through this and we mentioned about those that go over there and we come back and this culture. And I've heard senior leaders, especially here on JBLM, we're talking about how do you develop this warrior culture. And those that have not been to combat think it's all about, hey, I've got to suck it up, I've got to do this. And now you recognize, right? It's like, wow, I do have like shoulder pain. How do I like talk to somebody about how to rehab this and not wait until like 20 years later? Then now I'm trying to deal with it. If somebody had just helped me, you know, where do I tell them like, yeah, I have some anxiety about a relationship that I'm in as I'm going through this. And so what would you offer, you know, you kind of seeing this now and what you're doing with your jiu-jitsu students, how do you build a warrior culture and especially being a father of 3 girls?
I think the warrior culture in its foundation is obviously the ability to confront danger and confront fear. Like you're going to feel those emotions. Just like you said, when you were deployed, you felt those, but you overcame them. That's right. So when the time is right, you need to be able to pull that part of who you are and actually use that to like whatever the situation may be, if it's actual combat or if it's just something stressful where you have to protect your family or insert whatever scenario where you have to be a warrior and you have to bring that kind of energy to the fight. But I think the more important side of being a warrior that has been neglected is when you're not in that environment where you don't have, you know what, you don't have to be the big tough guy. You don't have to be like sitting in the corner of the room so you can watch the door to make sure that like your 6 is covered. Like, allow yourself to decompress, allow yourself to experience emotions and be vulnerable, allow yourself to talk about stuff too. You know, for me, that was a big thing. And I think I talked to you about it, Nick. I don't know if we talked, if it was when we were in your office or not, but when I went through the VA process, they, you know, you fill out the questionnaire. Have you ever been exposed to this? Have you ever been exposed to that? IEDs, incoming, RPG fire. And it's just like, check, 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 check. And they're like, okay, guess what? You're going to a therapist next. And I remember thinking that's the stupidest thing ever, right? I had no interest in doing that because I thought I was good. Everybody, it's easy to think you're good, but when you take a step back and then you kind of analyze yourself, especially with a third party who's not emotionally invested in you. And that's why I think therapy can be very powerful. Because I used to think if I'm having a hard time, I'll just talk to my girlfriend or I'll call my best friend. But those people, no matter what you say to them, that has the potential for them to look at you a little differently. Yeah. That's a scary thing. Yeah. And I think that's why guys like us have bottled stuff up your whole life. And sitting on that couch, and there's a thing of tissues next to me, and I'm like, kind of pussies are coming through here. You know what I mean? And guess what? 10 minutes into that conversation, I was using that tissue box. And the reason that I'm open about that is because it kind of opened the door for me to start unpacking the things that I've seen. And it's exactly what you said. Yeah. When you've seen kids blown up, that shouldn't feel right. There should be a part of you that's like, man, that's something that I should probably, I need to get off my chest, you know? And all these little things, and especially the guys that, like you were saying, did 14 rotations or whatever. Yeah. There's no way they're going to come home and not have stuff that they need to unpack to help them decompress. So for me, I kind of found it just by chance, and it ended up being one of the best things that I've ever done. And I went back and talked to her probably 30 times. You know, over the next couple of years, I really invested in her because I felt when I would leave her office, I was like, oh, I feel better. I feel clear. I feel like I have tools now. And it was weird too, because she even said to me one day, she's like, I just want you to know, like, if you run into me in the mall or something, don't say hi to me. We're not friends. And I was like, oh, check, got it, you know? But like, and it sounds kind of harsh, but at the same time, she wants me to know, like, what we have, it's right here. Yeah. And it's not anywhere else. Yeah. It's right here. And so that actually kind of empowers that relationship, you know? And I don't know why a lot of young Rangers think that counseling is a stupid idea or makes you weak, but every single person that I've talked to that has went through the process, hindsight, they're grateful for it. Yeah. So even if you're sitting here now and you think it's stupid as you're listening to us, don't write it off the table. Like, don't take it off the table. It's a tool at some point. Could be very beneficial.
Well, I've mentioned to you, you know, everybody that I know that I've served with, that I have great relationship with, officers, non-commissioned officers, served not just in the Ranger Regiment, but, you know, in other assignments, all of them have had some challenge, you know, in transition. And then there's something, and you and I have talked about it before, you don't know what is going to make that trigger. You know, all these emotions that come back, you know, and you're just going to wonder, like, why am I dealing with this? Like, now, I was never that case. And, you know, it's kind of stayed with me. One of these guys that I recently saw, he gave a story very similar, same kind of thing. Hey, why do I need to go see this individual? Completely went through this cathartic moment, you know, broke down, and now it's one of those things. And part of it, I think it goes back to what you mentioned in the beginning. Nobody wants to be open and honest, you know, or we weren't taught that way to say, hey, I'm dealing with something right here, you know, and I want to share. It starts off with, you know, is there somebody that I can communicate that with, right? It's starting to build that network. And if you have that network, and it's important, and it's also important to realize it's not just a personal network, but it's also people that may not just have, like you mentioned, the tools. And it's always good, right? It's like a lot of times you can go to a bar and have a conversation and tell some people some things that you would never tell your buddies. Yeah. You know, as you're going through, it's a little bit something similar to that. But he said something to me. It's like, hey, we've all gone through something. He
Yeah.
goes, and we're waiting. When you get out, you're going to go through something too. And it's weird because, and I don't think I've ever shared this with anybody, but, minus my wife, but, for a certain period of time, like, I almost like felt like I was like having panic attacks to get back on an airplane. And I never really understood why I was going through that. And it was just one time. I mean, I've jumped out of an airplane, like almost 80 times and done all these other things. But I was on a flight that just had all this turbulence. And I think it was the first moment that I realized like I was not in control of this entire situation. And I had like woken up and I'm like holding on to this seat. And I'm like, my heart's like beating out of my chest, and I'm looking around, and then you just see, the sheer fear in everybody's. And I've been on helicopter rides that were worse, but I don't know why at that one moment. And then every time I was going back, onto a flight, I would have these same like reactions. And so I had to like go back, and I was like doing like breathing exercises and doing all these things, and I went through this for about 6 to 8 months until like now I'm like I'm okay with it, right? Yeah. And I'm like,
I always tell people though, like, how is it that it feels normal to get in a metal tube and go 500 miles an hour through the air? Like, we should all be having panic attacks every time we get on an airplane, right?
And it's on autopilot.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
can see the pilot like walking down. You're like, was that the pilot? He's like going to the bathroom. He's like, oh yeah, don't worry, it's on autopilot. Like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's funny you say that because it's like everybody's going to have something different that affects them.
Yeah.
And like something as little as that, like that literally had an effect on your physiology.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like one thing my therapist said to me that I found interesting was she goes, and she only dealt with combat veterans. That was like her little niche, right? And she goes, did you think that you were going to make it back from your deployments? Like, what was your mindset in regards to your survival? And I said, I would actually tell myself every deployment, this is the one that's going to get me. And I said, well, what that did is it allowed me to operate without fear. And it got to the point, and I'm not even saying this to like sound like a tough guy or whatever. It was just once you understand, like, okay, this is probably going to be the one that gets me. Well, now when you're getting IED'd and mortars are landing next to you, fear is not the emotion that comes to light. It's almost excitement, you know?
Yeah.
And she told me, she's like, almost every guy from your community that I asked that question to gives me the exact same answer. Because that is how you guys, it's a self-preservation thing. Like, you can't wake up and think, oh man, I might get killed today.
Yeah.
Because imagine having that kind of like melancholy attitude when you're downrange. It's like, fuck yeah, I might get blown up today. I don't give a shit. Let's go. Mm-hmm. And she goes, you adopt that mindset for long enough, and now you come home. Well, guess what? Now you might die of prostate cancer at 82 years old or whatever it is, right?
That's right.
You got to rewire your brain. You're not going to have some heroic death getting blown up on the other side of the world. And so I got out of the military a long time ago. I never thought I'd see 40, ever. That was like, there's no way, The number was 37, and then 37 came. I was like, fuck, I made it. And then the next number was 40, and I was like, there's no fucking way. And so I always joke with my wife. I'm like, if I see 40, I'm going to see 80, okay? And so luckily 40 just passed, and I'm good. But it's like, your brain actually changes. You don't have the long-term vision of survivability anymore.
Yeah.
And again, everybody walks a different path, but that was something that was like kind of heavy for me. It was weird to unpack that,
I think for me, it changed a little bit when, as you recognize you've got different responsibilities when your family starts to grow, right? And then that thing that became that screaming object, that you're loving to death and feeding, talks back to you, and then at the same time, he's asking you certain questions, and it always ends with why. And it's like riding with the Riddler,
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And then you realize like, wow, like I don't want to leave these individuals. Like, I have a bigger responsibility when I go home on a couple of things, and so that took a little bit of, pause every time that, what did I need to tell myself to make sure when I go through, I could focus on what I needed to, but know that when I need to come back here, I needed to be able to come back and say, this is where I need to be now.
Now, my hat's off to you guys that did this mission, that lived this lifestyle with kids, because I honestly think to go back to that lifestyle with my 3 daughters at home, I feel like I'd be combat ineffective. Seriously, it would weigh heavy on me, because then you start to think about the likelihood of you not coming home from a deployment in 03, 04, 05, 06 in Iraq. It was like, there's plenty of guys not coming home from deployments. That was just part of the game we were playing, And to try and process those emotions of, okay, now my daughters are going to have to navigate this world without me, I think it would have fucking haunted me.
It was crazy when I was was trying to go out to the Ranger Regiment, and I was overseas the first time, and I sat down with the battalion commander at the time of 275, and what he told me was, he said, hey, I feel like a lot of these spouses are just kind of waiting. Like, when is it their time to get the phone call?
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, a battalion commander's telling me this, that in an organization that I want to come and serve with. And you're right, and that was back in 03, 04 time frame, so it was still relatively early, and they were having this conversation, and so I appreciate us, like this dialogue that we're having about being open and sharing as we're talking about what this warrior culture is. But I think that the other portion that you mentioned in the office, which is just as important when you mentioned that book, of the 5 rings.
The book of 5 rings.
Yeah, and if you could share with the team, like, how important that is. And I think that's the other aspect, right, of being that warrior culture.
And so it was written by Musashi, who was the greatest Japanese samurai of all time. And his whole approach to being a warrior, it's night and day different from, like, the American culture. And he said, if you want to be the most dangerous warrior with the will to kill, in order to be that person, you also have to balance that on the back end. You have to be capable of love, and you have to be capable of, like, compassion and all of these things. Like, in order to kill, you have to love. And his whole approach to being a warrior was finding the balance. So he's like, yeah, you can fight duels, and you can train with your sword, and you can do all the things that are necessary to be a good warrior, but then you have to go home and you have to paint. You have to write poetry. You have to grow flowers. You have to tend your garden. And what that does is it balances you emotionally. So when it's time to rise to the occasion and be a warrior, you're approaching that combat scenario as a balanced person. And that fucking hit me in the face when I read that, because it's like, we don't do any, like I said in your office, if I told my Ranger platoon, hey, I know we're going to go pound beers on Friday night, but I have a flower garden to tend, I would have been RFS'd, released for standards. I'm getting sent down the road. So the U.S. military doesn't really, I don't feel like that's part of growing our warriors. We're stabbing bayonets saying, what makes the grass grow? Blood, blood, blood. But then the other side of that is everything's a dichotomy, right? You have most guys for an enlistment or 2. What can you really do with that? You have so much time to train them up, get them technically and tactically proficient, have them, like, understand how to run all their weapon systems and all the gear. They get a deployment or 2 downrange. Now they're ETSing, and it's on to the next batch, right? And so I feel like it's not even necessarily the military's burden to teach our young men and women that balance. I think it needs to start at the home. And it needs to be like a cultural shift overall, And then you come into the military wanting to be a warrior, they hone that craft. But, dude, does our schools teach about happiness? Do they teach about breath work? Do they teach about, like, overcoming adversity and the things that do help you become a balanced person? I feel like that's kind of lost, Well,
I would even go back to the same thing where, I ask my, all the teachers I go and I see with my son, and I'm like, hey, I'm not here to discuss about his grades. That's between you and my son. I'm here just to find out, my expectation for my son is to question everything he learns. But he does it in a respectful manner.
Yeah.
Hey, ma'am, that's a great point. Here's something that I would offer. Hey, that's interesting. I never thought about it this way. I thought taking from this reading was this, this, and this. And every time I say that, they just look at me and they're like,
now they get it.
That's exactly how your son is, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm like, if he's not going to be able to have these uncomfortable conversations, the discourse, and he's doing it in this setting, in academics, where is he going to learn this?
Yeah.
How's he going to learn negotiation and consensus building and conflict resolution? It's not going to just show up in an Amazon, Prime Day special, and he's just like, deliver, take this to college. Because, the further and further, if you don't have that skill set, just as you mentioned, right? And so I do also believe, parents have that responsibility, or whoever that, the imparting mentor is, that you look up to. It goes back to building this network, who's the individual that you're going to have this conversation with. And if it's not this meaningful one and you're not willing to challenge ideas and have these discussions, but at the same time, right, as I've always said, like give them the love that they not necessarily may want, but the love that they need. But then at the same time, challenge them, make them do things that are really, really hard, but then find in a way that they know, right? Because I still got to build his trust with him. At some point, if he's going through something challenging in his life, he has a choice. Does he want to come to me or does he not want to come to me? And that's what we're hoping, right, through this portion of it. But I agree that this warrior culture, and it starts with this mindset, right? And so we've been having this discussion amongst senior leaders that we want to get away from this masculine culture and we want to grow this warrior culture. And I agree with you. I think it's got to start as we're coming through, and you recognize those that are coming from different walks are going to have different sets of values from the values of the organization. And that kind of goes back with the number of touch points you need to have to kind of close that gap.
Yeah.
But as a dad that, of 3 daughters, how do you instill in them, this mindset of a warrior culture?
Well, and it's, it's like the story I told you in your office again, which we should have that could have just been the podcast, right? But, I think the biggest thing that I'm trying to impart on my daughters right now, and they're 5, 8, and 11. So they're still pretty young, but I don't want them to be controlled by fear.
Exactly.
I think having the confidence to believe in yourself and not allow this world to put you in a state of fear is really will make or break who they become for the rest of their lives.
That's a great
point. And, they say 1 in 3 girls get sexually assaulted, right? And what do predators do? They look for the weak, the meek, the wounded. And I feel like if I do my job correctly as a father, it's not that they'll be able to defend themselves against attackers, is that they will prevent those type of scenarios from ever presenting themselves, because people will look into their eyes and they'll say, not today. I'll move on to the next one. Now, I always tell my wife, we joke, I'm like, when am I going to get fucking mugged? I want to get mugged, and she's like, no one's mugging you. It's not going to happen, But I joke about it, but it's the same thing with my girls. Like, I want them, in a military term, to be a hard target, This isn't the one, we're going to wait for the next one. But that confidence comes through a bunch of different ways. Like, 2 of my girls are in jiu-jitsu and 1 isn't, because she likes gymnastics and jiu-jitsu's stupid, right? And so, and I balance that. I try and walk that line of I don't want to force them into things because that'll push them away, right? Yeah. And she's my best athlete too. She's a little freak. I'm hoping she'll come to jiu-jitsu at some point. But it's like the story I told you earlier. My daughter came into my room one day and she was crying. She's like, there's a man under my bed. And this was like middle of the night, right? And so she was scared and kind of panicked. And I looked at her and I calmed her down. I said, hey, listen, if there's a man in your room, we're not the ones that are afraid. He's the one that needs to be fucking afraid. Okay? He's going to have a lot bigger problem than we're going to have. And just the mindset of being willing, like, oh, I'm not afraid of this guy. Let's go get him. And I grabbed my Glock. And she was 4 at the time. Dad with the fucking Glock and a Surefire, But it turned it from her feeling panic to her feeling excitement. And she's like, yeah, let's go get him. And, like I said, we were going crabbing that weekend. She's like, we'll put him in the crab pots. And I'm like, yeah, we'll put him in the crab. I was like, hey, I'm raising a mini me. I like this. But in all seriousness, it was just a moment in time that shifted her perspective. Yeah. And went in there and pulled the covers up from under the bed, and obviously there was nobody there. It was just a bad dream or whatever. But she references that regularly now. And I think it's just like I said about my team leader coming. There's moments in time that kind of change the trajectory of your life. And we need to give those to our kids in order to make sure that they become competent, confident people. And I think we could go down a whole nother rabbit hole on fear, but I feel like fear is something that's controlling our entire culture lately. Yeah. Everybody is afraid of everything. And you have to understand, like, yes, you assess risk, you mitigate what you can, but what you can't, it is what it is. Yeah. And I think guys like us had to confront that in real time. Yeah. Because you can do everything tactically proficient and correct, and you can still run over an IED and get blown to bits. Yeah. And so you understand there's a certain amount of how things are going to play out that are outside of my control. And you just have to come to peace with them. And if my daughters can grow into women that don't allow fear to really dictate what they do and what they don't do, I think that that's a success.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at that, right? So it's control what you can control, look at the perspective, build this network out of it. I mean, you're always going to have fear, but it's how do you go through this quest of organizational calm? How do you get calm, for your own self? And I think part of that is as we talk about being creatures of habit, part of this thing is how do you build discipline? How do you individual self-discipline, accountability, routine? And I think part of that stuff is, I mentioned to you in the office, when my son, at third grade, he's running around, he's all super, hyper, and I'm getting, discussions with the administration and his teachers that, hey, I think he needs to be tested. And I'm like, he's not getting tested, and we put him
tested positive for being a little boy.
And all little kids have energy like this. Like I can't sit still for, an hour without doing something. So it's like, hey, we put them into boxing at an early age. But as we talked about from our points, from our parents and involving us, like my parents would have never even considered putting me into boxing at that young of an age. It was like, no, not until high school and, no contact and this, that, whatever. And we put him into boxing when he was about 7, 8 years old. And it gave him an outlet, as you talked about.
Yeah.
And so, we're talking about this portion about being open and transparent and being able to share, being a warrior that has other activities to find this balance, and then how do you combat this fear? But I think another portion of this culture is you got to have fitness, right?
You got to have fitness, and I'll even take it a step farther and be like, part of your fitness routine needs to be martial arts. And I think, and I'm biased because I own a jiu-jitsu academy and I'm obsessed with jiu-jitsu, but I mean the top four, it's wrestling, boxing, kickboxing, or jiu-jitsu. Those 4 arts will put you in your place. They will make you feel uncomfortable. They will make you face your fears, because when you got somebody on top of you twisting you up, you can't breathe, there's a bunch of weight on your diaphragm, it starts to incite that fight or flight response. Okay, so I either need to beat this guy up or I need to get out of here. And neither of those options are available because you can't get away from him and you can't beat him up. And so all these bells and whistles are going off in your head. And I always tell my students, it's like, we're on our mats, you're training with a friend, right? And all you have to do is tap and it's over. But the body and the mind and its core, it doesn't realize that. And when you're getting strangled by somebody on top of you and you can't breathe, it feels like it's a fight to the death, And what it does is it teaches you to be comfortable in uncomfortable situations. And I think that, yes, that is directly applicable to some guy grabbing you in an alley, right? And I tell the women that, like, you don't want the first time some guy is on top of you to be in a real world situation. Let's do it on the mats in the gym. We can drill that 10,000 times. And then when it happens out in the street, it's not going to feel that foreign to you. And that's the beauty of training and the beauty of jiu-jitsu. But the other side of it is it builds that resiliency and that toughness and that willingness to face adversity in a wide spectrum of things that are going to be presented to you in life. Relationships, careers, the list goes on and on and on. You can take that ability to be comfortable in uncomfortable situations and apply it almost anywhere. So that's why I think jiu-jitsu is such a powerful tool.
Yeah, I love the journey, when those that become students and disciples of jiu-jitsu are really, those martial arts that you've mentioned and the journey they have to go through. It's not this expectation of I show up to X number of classes and I'm getting this belt. I go to this tournament. You'll be told when you're moving to the next level, when you're told you're ready to move to the next level. And I don't know about, and I know you're going to share a little bit about your story, but I love that, because I've heard, different individuals talk about this, that sometimes when you show up and there's this expectation, that, hey, I went through this class and I should get this portion of it. And I think that's very applicable if you take that same mindset as about being a soldier. You're going to go through this, and sometimes it's going to take, one individual one time to go to Ranger school. Sometimes it's going to be as long as it takes. and it's going to be 100+ days. Sometimes it's going to be 3 years as you're going through this.
Exactly.
But it's this overcoming adversity that we go back to. And I think that what you've mentioned specifically in your profession now is a way to demonstrate that.
Yeah. And jiu-jitsu is interesting. And I tell all my students, like, what the belt system represents is your journey. Okay. And that's it. Don't start setting a bunch of expectations of how fast you want to promote, or I'm this belt and then this other belt choked me out. Like, because a good coach can look at the person as an individual and look at their path and look at what they want to become. And if I got a 22-year-old who was wrestled since the time he was 4, and now he wants to fight in the UFC someday, like, his jiu-jitsu path is going to be very different than a guy that works at Boeing and a construction company on the side, and he can only attend 1 class a week because he has 3 kids at home and he has to balance them. Like, so your promotions through jiu-jitsu is reflective of your journey. And I think a good coach can kind of ascertain, like, those little nuances of when they're ready to promote. And the coolest thing about it is it's a long journey, Like, it took me 10 years to get my black belt, and that's 10 years of grinding hard. Whereas there's some guys that get it quicker, and then there's some guys that get it takes way longer. But that doesn't matter, because the length of time it takes you represents your journey. And I think that's something that you can apply to, like, a lot of aspects of life,
Absolutely. And it goes back to the same thing when we talked about relationships. At a certain point, you're going to be ready, in a relationship potentially, with a significant other, to get married, have kids. It's all varies. There's no cookie cutter solution as you're going through this. And it goes back to the same thing on the path. You may start off in a certain MOS and find yourself in a completely different MOS or a different, and just as you mentioned in the past. But the thing, I was listening. My son was sharing with me a guest that he had on a Rogan podcast, and what he was talking about in the journey of jiu-jitsu. He was like, one of the worst things is to make somebody or belt somebody, early, and they're not ready to have that qualification. That's like the worst thing you can do. It's like, it's making a black belt and he gets his ass kicked by a white belt.
That makes no sense, right?
Exactly.
So, like, my professor, he always says, like, obviously, if I'm tying a blue belt on somebody's waist or a purple belt, they have to be legit at that level when it comes to the skill set. Okay, they have to have the skill set. But more importantly than the skill set is it has to be aligned with their life journey, And so that's where I always tell people it comes down to finding the right team and the right person that you want to train under, because a lot of what you get out of your gym is just kind of the vibe and the energy of the people that you share that with. I even tell people that come to my gym to check it out, I say, make sure you check out the other gyms in the area too. Because if you check them out and you want to stay there, then you're probably not a good fit for here,
Yeah, I think that, it's also applicable when we talk about mentorship in the Army, right? And making sure that, hey, when you say this individual is ready to go and test for this expert badge, go to this school, this is individual ready to step up into this leadership position. They've not only demonstrated the skill set, but you've invested in them that that they're going to be able to have the skills and the problem solving to be able to make this sound judgment.
Yeah. And then the other side of that, like I was telling Nick, when you get a promotion, be it in the Army or be it on the jiu-jitsu mats, you should feel afraid. Like, you should feel like, oh no, like, this is a lot. This is the next level of responsibility.
Yeah.
I'm not ready for this. I got promoted to E5 in Afghanistan. My platoon sergeant called me into his hooch, and I was a tab spec 4 for like a minute. Like, I pretty much bypassed being a tab spec 4. I was not a tab spec 4 for very long. He called me in his office and he's like, hey, you're a team leader in Alpha 3-1 now. And I'm like, what? I didn't go to the board. I didn't put a packet in. He's like, we're in Afghanistan. I can combat promote. And my PL was Lieutenant Satterland at the time. I'm sure you crossed. Yeah, I'm sure you crossed paths with him at some point in time.
Yeah, Rich Satterland. Yeah,
he's awesome.
Yeah,
I love that guy. Yeah, just like that. Guess what? You're sergeant now. And I'm like, what the fuck, dude? Like, I liked hiding behind this sham shield. Like, tab spec 4, that's the best job in the Army. Like, you don't get shit on, but guess what? You got your Ranger tab, so everyone respects you now, But yeah, they took that from me. It only lasted a minute. But again, like with that promotion comes new responsibility. And so I was breaking out 7-8 and looking at the battle drills and like reading up because I'm like, dude, I'm only 21 years old. And the guys that they put me on, the team that they put me on, I was the youngest guy. And so it was Bohannon and his name was Dupay and Zdenek and all these guys that kind of took the extended, they went to community college for 2 years or whatever it was. Then they went in the Army. And so I was the leader and the youngest one. And I was like, and then the other side of it is, 10 minutes ago, they're my peers and now I'm their sergeant. That's always kind of a weird thing to dissect as well, And so, it's like we talked about, I just tried to approach leadership as I want these guys to know that I care about them as people first. And now we're going to do our military mission second. And dude, it was awesome. I love that team.
You know what's awesome? And when you mentioned that, right? Hey, I want to care about people first and then the mission. It's like our senior leaders are echoing this thing. And right now that's the messaging.
That's awesome.
Strategic leaders are saying, hey, people first as we walk through this. And as you look through, our senior leaders on this installation, our division commander down here, it's all about people, So one of the things, I'll just be honest with you, is you can kind of see, you got to tense a little bit about our culture here in this organization. We got to have some pride. We care about the safe and secure environment. But one of the things that I looked at it is say, hey, if you're in the Lancer Brigade, it's about being a team of teams, being inclusive, right? And we're committed to winning and dedicated to the pursuit of excellence. But the other portion about it is, in order to get after all these lines of effort, you got to build this environment first, right? This environment of accountability and discipline and the trust aspect and how do we communicate and message and all this other portion of it. And one of the things, you've got, hey, how to be an expert, how to be lethal, deployment readiness, all these other things. But one of the things I think that we missed out on this and we fell short that we're now addressing, I think, in a different approach is how we integrate, how we onboard. And I just assumed that the lessons that I had learned early on were just still occurring until we start seeing, examples where, hey, we've got a lot of soldiers that are no longer able to stay, and we're not being honest with ourselves. Is it really, as my boss says, a failure to lead or a failure to repair? So we looked at a deliberate line of effort now in integration, and it's an onboarding, right? So I say integration is really, how are we building a network, right, of resources that are going to help this soldier and their family, right, to not only meet their own goals in life personally and professionally, but give them the skill set so they can end up dealing with some challenges along the way. And so it starts off, some people go, well, like integration is, hey, what you do at the, when you're in process. Some people say, hey, integration is this checklist is going on. And what I'm offering to them now is all of that is in part of the entire process, and it all has to be nested. So if you think of the easiest way, hey, what you get on the installation from the day one, to get a sponsor, corps and division, that's like a third. Here, you saw our Lancer Performance Center. We're just bringing all these resources together, but we got to bolt it on to some experience. So now we're teaching, like what you and I didn't have to go through. It's like, hey, there's this thing called like dating apps, and here's some of the challenges with it, right? Well, it's one thing to have the discussion about it, and somebody's up there like giving you the stats, but it's also something to have a team leader or squad leader who goes, okay, we just had the discussion about some of the challenges and the concerns about online dating.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of sad I never got to experience Tinder.
Like now you have a leader that can sit there and go, hey, let me tell you a good story and a bad story with online dating. And so that's like the next third. But then that last one is probably the most important, which is the battalion and company down so you're integrated in that team and squad. And so who showed you like, hey, man, this is how you wear your kit. This is how you're going to make sure where you get your stuff sewed up. This is where you need to go. This is where we're all going to drink beer. Do not go to these following places, and give you that orientation. And what we're doing is we're bringing a soldier who's already like, okay, his pay is good, his medical's good, his family's moved in. Let's run him out to this training event. And what we're doing is we're pawning all this responsibility down to our lowest leaders with the least experience. And I'm like, that's not going to happen anymore.
I mean, I literally remember that night showing up to regiment. His name was Sergeant Lynch. This is how you tie your gear down. This is right. Like, and just step by step by step by step, like walking you through everything you need to know about being a new Ranger.
That's exactly
You know?
right. And that's like the most important and the final process. But all that's got to be, and I'm telling the team now is all that integration needs to take place before that soldier even goes out to do any collective training.
Yeah.
Because if we don't do that right, then we're creating a soldier that we don't know what his foundation is. We don't know if he's got any challenges. We don't know his network.
Yeah.
You know, we don't know anything about his family. We don't know the individual that inspired him to come into the military. You know, we don't know if he's prone to any type of medical injuries or any of those challenges. We're just worried about shooting a squad live fire. And I'm
Yeah.
like, we got to get the integration and the onboarding right first.
That's pretty cool that even at the highest level now, they're saying people first. Because if someone's disgruntled or they're going through a hard time or they don't trust somebody in their platoon or insert anything that could possibly go wrong with soldiers, right? We all know that that is a cancer.
Oh, yeah.
And that can grow and metastasize into like a big, big problem. You know, the regiment's one thing because when people start to underperform or they start to be that cancer, we just send them packing. And I mean, that might be good for combat readiness, but what's really going on with that person? Why are they there? And for most units that don't have the ability to just send guys down the road, well, we better figure this out because that person's going down range with you. And we need to make sure they're good long before that day arises, you know?
That's where I tell guys, you know, I loved every organization that I've ever been in and I had an opportunity and a privilege to serve in. You know, and I love the Ranger Regiment, but one of the challenges that the Ranger Regiment doesn't have to deal with is you can RFS somebody.
Yeah.
Here, you're having to know. You got to, and it's even more important to know, you know, this and go through this integration and onboarding because just as you've mentioned, which you remembered in the very beginning, you know, and this leadership moment, like I got to be committed to these individuals to my left and right. And now I'm recognizing my team leader is also in this as well. If you don't have that moment and you don't try to find that moment as quick as you can and set the conditions so it occurs, then when we do have a challenge, there's a divorce, a suicide ideation, you know, or there's something that goes on, as you say, then it becomes, and we can't wait for an event to be something that now we're having to react to. And we're not counting near misses, you know, or we're not even preparing ourselves to address any near misses that come forth. We'll have bigger issues and we're having to worry about squad live fires or, you know, doing some collective event.
Yeah. So when you do have soldiers that are going through, like you said, a divorce or a death in the family and they're just not in the game mentally anymore, without RFS as a solution, what are your leadership abilities to deal with those kind of things?
Yeah, so it first starts off, right, with his teammates. So it helps with his teammates. It goes back to we have certain resources that they can go back. They have the chaplain. We have our own BH capability in here.
Okay.
So what we've tried to do is bring all those resources together and put it in the Lancer Performance Center. So now a company commander can bring certain resources at his level with a first sergeant. At a battalion and a CSM can bring some certain resources. But we can do the same thing. And when you layer all that stuff on top of each other, you know, it's a combined learned assessment about what's the way ahead. So if Chung's having some issues and he goes into BH and says, hey, I'm thinking about self-harm and this is the case, it's important to have a provider provide you some assessment. Like, I think this individual needs to be on this medication, this treatment, this amount of time. And if I see, you know, this type of increased activity, they're on the path. But you know what also is important to provide that assessment? The chain of command.
Yeah.
You know, the chain of command needs to be able to say, hey, here's what we want to say, and then set goals for these individuals so they can work toward that stuff. And then the third portion about it is like personally. Who's his friends and like what do we want to see, like how they're going. So when we come back together and we say, hey, how's Chung doing? If we're only relying on our providers to say, well, they're showing up all the time for, you know, our BH appointments, they're taking the medication properly, that's just one portion of the entire pie. That's why I say it's understanding the network, it's leveraging and understanding what a soldier's baseline is. So when you ask the question, hey, when somebody has or go through a divorce or whatever, do we know what his baseline was before they had these challenges? And so
It comes back down to knowing them.
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And so I'll share a phrase that I've told them, you know, when you go to these combat training centers, you know, you have all these external, you know, opportunities for those to go and be an observer, controller, and a trainer, or observer, coach, and trainer. And what I tell them is, don't be the big O, little C, little T. Like, anybody can be an observer. So, hey, did you guys know that Chung was having, challenges with his marriage? And everybody goes, oh, yeah, Roger, we were tracking that. Okay, well, the next question is really, I'm asking you as a coach, like, so what did you do? Because coaches know techniques, right? They know approaches. Like, you as a jiu-jitsu coach, you can be like, Chung, like, do the following things. Like, don't listen to what he's telling you. Listen to me, And then at the same time, as a trainer, you got to know the doctrine, right? You got to know the authorities. You got to know, like, the resources and the references that do that. Otherwise, all we're doing is we're just creating a bunch of leaders that are being observers and saying, hey, this is the case. That's what I would share that I think is a little bit more challenging. But I've seen a lot of great things that the regiment's trying to do, that is recognized. They're not seeing it necessarily that's in there. It's guys like you and I have talked about after they serve, they're having challenges. And they want to try to find, how do we build these networks and have these resources so they can go back and tie into that.
It's pretty incredible hearing you talk about this because, like we talked about, we're going to release this podcast on both our platforms. And I'm assuming most of your platform is probably members of the military, but a lot of mine isn't. And this just goes to show those people, to kind of paint a picture like how many hats military leaders have to wear. Because, like, it's not like you have these guys 9 to 5, you know? You have to make sure, like, personally and professionally and emotionally, like, what other employer in any other capacity has to look out for people in all these different realms, It's pretty incredible. And, like, for us, that's normal. Just that's military life. But if you step outside of that, it's actually pretty incredible.
That's right. There's no clock, right? There's no off time. There's no off duty switch on being a leader. When you have this, when you mentioned, right, at what level, when you were earlier on or now, and it's this care, and I mentioned it's like it's at the direct level because you get to see this. Everything you do, you get to see an immediate reaction. And you get to see, a lot of times, it's going to be the nonverbal. When you tell them something, they're like looking at you that weird way, like, what are we doing? It's like, all right, let me reattack with this messaging, But, it goes back to this thing. What I would offer when people say, what is it like being in the military? I say, well, being in the profession of arms, we have this awesome responsibility of repetitive professional judgment to manage two things, violence and risk. And then you have this ability that you take care of people, right? And you take care of soldiers because you are entrusted with America's treasure. And as I talked about this currency of trust, you own this responsibility to build trust internally within the organization. And then we have this fiduciary responsibility, right, to build trust with the American public that says we are going to take care of this treasure that you said is a voluntary thing to be part of the 1% to protect the 99%.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible.
Well, I really appreciate it. We could be chatting, I think, for 3-4 hours,
How long has it been?
How long's it been?
1 hour and 34 minutes.
Okay. That flew by. I got to ask you this, though. As a brigade commander, are zonks still a thing?
Not in this brigade. Not in my company.
As every
Andy stumping his boys, but
as everybody's waiting on bated breath, zonk's a real thing. I really want zonks to be a thing, and so where I grew up, they're still a thing. But I am also a disciple and a believer that that PT is an opportunity to do. If you only got to do one thing right or one thing hard. Like, do good and hard PT,
Yeah, of course.
And if you do that, it's just like you talked about. And when you get, the what you doing PT for when you were in your 20s, like I just told you, right? Like, truth be told, I'm sitting down with my surgeon and she's like, hey, you gotta do these stretching on your hip flexors. And I'm like, I don't know what that is. I'm joking, right? Yeah. But it's like, this time the reason why I do PT and the focus and the movement prep and the prehab that you don't necessarily focus on because when you're 18, 21 and you think you're bulletproof and you can run through walls and then you're like, what's wrong with my shoulder? You know what I mean? And it's just you happen to turn 30.
Yep.
35.
38's the one that got me. I swear to God, the wheels fell off at 38. Our bedroom looks like a physical therapy office. I got foam rollers and prana mats and chirp wheels and tiger tails, all this stuff.
That's awesome.
Because I'm like, dude, I got to start preserving this thing because it's falling apart.
That's awesome. And you're right. I mean, if you watch the amount of time I have to spend like warming up my shoulders and my hips now, you'd think like, oh my goodness, it's like this guy's working in the curves or something, you know? But, you know, I think it's awesome because, you know, you talked about, you know, this warrior culture, but you also talked about the importance of fitness. And we talked a little about this thing with, you know, in my office there about diet. But, you know, I read that article about how you and your wife, you know, got together and about how important, you know, fitness is and really this lifestyle that you guys are doing together with jiu-jitsu and all that. And I was wondering if you can share, because I've asked a couple of other guests who are real big in the physical fitness. How do you inspire somebody that's that and close to you, you know, that to push them to meet their goals or to encourage them or have those honest, uncomfortable conversations about weight and diet or anything like that?
The biggest thing that I always tell people, because especially like I own a CrossFit and a jiu-jitsu academy. So that's intimidating to a lot of people. Nobody wants to show up. And I can't count how many times I've had people tell me, I want to start training with you, but I'm going to get in shape first. And like, well, the only way to get in shape for fighting is fighting. So just show up. And I try and talk people into, my magic number is 3 months. I always tell people, if you can commit to 3 months of training, and if you look at the big spectrum of life, 3 months is nothing, right?
Yeah.
But 90 days, I think, is the magic number to where if you put the work in, you'll see the results too.
Yeah.
And so I try and inspire people that are interested in training or interested in jiu-jitsu, or even ones that aren't. And I mean, I have buddies that I've been trying to talk onto the mats for a decade that still won't have anything to do with it. But if you give yourself 3 months of committing to something that is going to suck, and I think we have to be honest with people about that. Real fitness and real capabilities, they're not garnered by the shake weight or the thigh master.
Yeah.
It's like, I want you to understand practice is going to be hard.
Yeah.
It's not going to feel good. And you're going to be flopping around like a fish out of water for a couple months. But that first time that you sweep someone, you get on top of them and you hit a choke or you hit an arm bar, it's like, wow, this actually works. And I always, like, as you grow in jiu-jitsu, so you show up as the day one white belt and you got blues and purples above you and you train for 3 months. Well, those guys and gals are getting better too. Mm-hmm. So you feel like you just still suck, you know? But once you've put in 3-4 months and then a couple new people show up and you grab a hold of them and you can treat them like a child and you can do whatever you want, that's the moment when they're like, wow, I'm hooked.
Yeah.
And people will reach a point where once they see the results in real time, be it their abilities or what they look like when they look in the mirror, once they reach that point, that becomes a new metric for them. And they don't want to drop below that. And that's why we talked about in your office. I think once you reach a metric that you're proud of, you've reached a level of fitness or ability that you're like, yeah, I feel good there. You drop below that, something starts to feel off.
Yeah.
So I want to build people's metrics to where that's the new best version of themselves. And sure, there's ebbs and flows in life. They'll drop below that based on whatever, career, relationships. But now they know in the back of their mind, I need to get back to here. Mm-hmm. And then they try and work past that. And, my wife went all in with CrossFit because she saw the change in real time. She tried a bunch of different things and different diets, and it just wasn't working for her. And then she's like, okay, I'm going to try keto and CrossFit. And it's funny because, like, a lot of people hate on that. That's flavor of the week or whatever, right? Yeah. But she went from not being able to do one pull-up to 100 now. That's 10 sets of 10, okay? not just 100 in a row. But she'll do a workout where she does 10 sets of 10.
Wow.
And there's a lot of people that don't probably ever think that they could do a dead hang pull-up ever, And so once she started to see both her abilities and then also just her physicality increasing, once you're on the path, now you're on the path, and being on the path feels good, right?
It does.
And once being on the path feels good, you're probably not going to veer off it. But there's that initial climbing up and getting started. I think that's the toughest for people, you know?
Yeah. When I was, I was picturing like, hey, the only way to get better at fighting is fighting. The guy just showing up. I'm picturing that scene from Dodgeball, like,
Yeah.
but you mentioned that 3 months. It reminds me when McConaughey won the Academy Award. He's like, hey, my hero is me 10 years from now. Right. So it's the same kind of thing. You were talking, hey, stick with this for 90 days or, 3 months, and you will see a different version of yourself.
Yep, exactly.
Be the version of yourself 90 days from now, or strive to be, that version of yourself, 90 days from now. And then as you get hooked, as you said, right, you're going to still be chasing that next version.
Exactly. I mean, I've been a black belt for 6 years now, and I feel like I may have just broke through another plateau. And I'm like, yes, I just got better. Like, you can almost feel it like a light switch sometimes. Your timing and your speed and everything just kind of gets a little tighter. I'm like, okay. And so once you feel that, I mean, it slows down. Incrementally, it slows down drastically. When you're a new white belt, you'll make progress by leaps and bounds. And it consistently gets tighter and tighter and tighter, but the journey never stops. And that's what's exciting about it.
That's a great point. I mean, that's the reason why, the foundation of the Army Combatives program is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And so we had Staff Sergeant Aaron Raposa who helped stand up the program, and now he went back down to Benning to join the SFAB that's down there. But we're starting this thing back up with another combatives instructor, and I know they were taking you up and they showed you what we were going to be doing. But I think that the combatives program goes back to what we were talking about, this confidence. So you're building
100%.
this, right? You're building this warrior culture, right? And so, I love seeing, young soldiers. I mean, today when you saw the squad competition and you talk about, when I see privates hop on a machine gun and just like taking this thing apart, like it's like nobody's business. We're throwing on, any type of medical triage. I mean, those are the individuals that in that moment, it's just going to like, that's how for me, at a leader that's so removed from where these soldiers are at, if I can watch a private who's only been in the organization for a month and they're like, hey, we're doing squad competition today. And he's like, what? And he just goes out there. I mean, one of the greatest things I'm going to remember just in this opportunity was I pinned on ARCOM for the winners in the squad competition. And I got a pin on an ARCOM on a private who had been in the unit for 2 weeks.
Oh,
Yeah. And he was just like, I'm doing all these things in basic that I never thought I would do until I showed up and it's like, hey, you're doing this thing.
Yeah.
And it's awesome.
That's cool to hear that the Army Combatives program is still, like, there's a lot of emphasis on that. Because the reality of any type of, like, realistic martial art is it's honing your warrior spirit. So it's like we talked about earlier. Am I going to be in the reeds of the Euphrates River trying to kill a guy with a K-bar? Well, maybe. Yeah. But the thing that is going to happen is you're going to have to fall back on that warrior spirit at some point in your military career and be willing to just get gritty and nasty. You're breathing hard. Your heart's about to beat out of your chest. And you're looking at the guy on the mat and you work your way back up to your feet and you feel like you're going to die, but I have to take this guy down and I have to get on top of him and I have to strangle him. Because if I don't, he's going to do that to me.
That's right.
And so it puts you in a position where you have to constantly hone that warrior mindset to win. And again, like that starts to carry over into a lot of other aspects of your life. So just because you're on the mats and you're learning to choke people, that might carry over to taking down a building and having to run up 3 flights of stairs or medevac your buddy and firemen carry him to the HLZ. Like a lot of what you learn on the mats is going to carry over to a lot of other aspects of soldiering. And so, I mean, if I was the emperor of America and had my magic wand, like every cop and every soldier would be training jiu-jitsu. Like that's how imperative I think that it is. And the other side of it is it diminishes that fear. To go back to that, like what we already talked about. But when I'm on patrol, when I was a police officer, when guys would be acting kind of squirrely, like I would always know in the back of my mind, okay, if this goes bad and this guy wants to fight, he's fucked. Right? And maybe I was wrong. Who knows? Maybe he's a Gracie that got addicted to heroin, right? You know what I'm saying? But at the same time, it's that confidence to be able to do your job. And what I found time and time again is that when you have that confidence and you're talking to someone, it allows you to actually be kinder to them.
Yeah.
Because I don't need to like have my chest puffed up and be trying to demean this guy. He could be wanted for whatever, or he could be like selling heroin, name it, whatever, right? I can confront this guy. I can be kind to him. Be like, hey, what's going on today? Blah, blah, blah. And if the situation calls for me to then go into violence, okay, we're ready for that too. But again, I think like that's a good mindset for soldiers and police officers to have. It's like, I know that I have my ace in the hole. So until I need to use that, I can be cool. I can be kind. I can show compassion, love, all these things that like those professions for the longest time kind of looked at with cross-eyed, crossed eyes.
I think that's something that the force that has had multiple reps of deploying during the GWAT got experience to do this, right? Because at some point, you're not going to be able to fight your way out just in a kinetic way in an insurgency or counterinsurgency. At some point, you're going to have to get after this center of gravity with people, and you're going to have to build some trust with them. Yeah. And just, Iraq, but even particularly in Afghanistan, I used to think that was the most, they were the most, like one of the most hospitable, people that I've ever encountered.
Oh, it was incredible.
Right?
I remember seeing people get in arguments with each other on patrol.
Yeah.
And the interpreter would be like, they're fighting over who gets to serve you guys a meal tonight.
Yeah.
Because they want to show gratitude.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
It would be crazy that you knew you were going to a specific location for a reason, and they're still trying to serve you tea. Right?
That's exactly right.
Like imagine that happening here. Like, hey, we're going to pick up your son for shoplifting, but do you want to come and join us for dinner? That would never be happening.
I always tell people, like, you can have Iraq. I have no desire to ever go back to Iraq. Maybe Erbil. I don't know if you've ever been up north to Erbil.
I haven't.
But it was up in Kurdistan. It doesn't even really feel like Iraq. But Afghanistan, if it ever becomes a permissive environment, I would fucking go there and like go hiking. I mean, like you said, the hospitality, the scenery, it's just dramatic. It's beautiful. But you know how it goes. Like it only takes a small percentage of people to fuck things up. And so, Afghanistan's off limits for now. But, in the 70s, it was like a tourist destination.
Yeah, that's true.
We had a CIA guy working out of our safe house. And I was like, how did you get this position? He goes, dude, after 9/11 kicked off, they just started pulling passports and seeing who traveled here. And he goes, in the 70s and early, like, whenever it was still a permissive environment, I used to just come here and go hiking. I spent a lot of time here. And so, boom, they made that connection. Now he's working for the agency.
I mean, it's crazy. I mean, my time there, that entire country, if you go to all different places, looks completely different.
Yep.
I mean, you'll see terrain where, I mean, it's you'll see the mountains that I go to places and I'm like, even Yakima, I'm like, man, this looks very familiar to
Yakistan.
Yeah, very familiar to Afghanistan or NTC. And then there's places that you just see, I mean, it's just, you see all these trees and this forest and you see like a river valley. I mean, there's some gorgeous places. Yeah. And just like I've mentioned before, the hospitality there is unbelievable. And I'll never forget, they're always trying to give you something. They're always appreciative of something that's going on. And every time that I went over there, it made me appreciate and look at a different perspective. It's like, now imagine being those that live there and seeing, American forces constantly come over. And they say, hey, you're the next individual that's going to help us. But what happens when you leave?
Yeah.
Is the next individual going to be the same thing? So it was an incredible experience, going over there. And I spent a lot of time in the P2KG in the Kandahar region, a little bit up in Logman and up there in the Northeast. But, all very, very, unique. But, that commonality and thread of, you went to an area. The places I knew that were bad is when you didn't see any kids.
Yeah, no, exactly right.
Right?
Yep.
You go to a place and it would be very eerie because there'd be no kids, and everybody would be kind of shielded around. And I'm like, okay, we're close to something here, Or you didn't hear any dogs barking or anything like that. And
that's a weird thing. And I didn't develop that in Afghanistan, but in Iraq where you can just feel the air that something bad's about to happen.
That's right.
And that happened enough times. It's like, I don't know what this is, but it's 100% reliable, And I'd even have guys get on the radio and be like, hey, things feel kind of weird. Get ready. Boom.
That's right.
So It's like a sixth sense. There's something. I think you're probably picking up on other people's energy.
Yeah.
Because the locals, like you said, a lot of those people know.
Yeah.
There's a reason why nobody's at the bazaar today, and normally there's hundreds of people. You know.
It's what I would offer is what we call tacit knowledge, right? So it's like when a surgeon goes through something and then they just recognize by feel that something isn't right. You know, even though that all the literature and everything lays out says I'm supposed to do these procedures, but he's like, stop, something doesn't feel right. It's the same reason why, you know, when you're making a call on something, you just know. You know, like I've seen this same individual, the way they walk, all these little characteristics that you don't even realize you're picking up, and they're sending these chemicals to your brain. That's like, this is it.
Yep.
You know, get ready, and it goes back to this flight or fight mentality that you talked about.
Have you ever read the book The Gift of Fear? So it's by Gavin de Becker, and he's like a big security-minded person. And one thing, he analyzes like lots of victims of crimes and rape, and he's like, it's nearly 100% of women that are exposed to violent rape knew it was going to happen prior to like the guy physically putting their hands on them. So like there's little things that are going off and little bells and whistles. And that's the whole point of that book, is listen to those. That we may not understand what's going on, but however, since the beginning of humanity, those things have been ingrained into us for survivability, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it goes back to the same portion, right? Is if you're that type of person and if you follow what we're talking about, you know, and really trying to achieve this warrior culture and this warrior mindset, this love you got to have for humanity.
Yeah, for
you
sure.
know? And you got to have this appreciation. We can teach you this skill set, right? To you know, lift weights, run fast, you know, shoot and do all these other things. But at the end of the day, the true problem solving, and that's one of the things I think it's interesting. You got to see that to be the tip of the spear, where we were training you to break glass, go over, do the other things, you know, and deliver war, right?
Yep.
In the crucible of ground combat. And then now you become a police officer. You're now protecting, you know, the population, but you know you're going to have these problem sets that you're not always going to be able to solve, you know, with the same ways that you were in the military.
Yeah. No, I think I appreciate how you worded that with humanity. And it's not just your platoon or your company or even America, but just humanity as a whole. Because, you know, like a lot of people kind of like give pushback to the term hearts and minds. But I can tell you, even in 2003, like that was early on in Afghanistan, those are some of the most rewarding operations I've ever been a part of. We would do med caps, where we would just go medical capability, where we would bring in all the locals that were sick or injured or had any kind of ailments that we could treat. We would run generators and like get power to villages that have never had power. And dude, you'd go back to your safe house at night and actually feel like, man, smiles all day. You're helping sick kids, and it was cool, you know?
Yeah.
And I think for soldiers that want to just get after it and kill bad guys, like, trust me, I'm 40 years old. When I see stuff on the news, like when ISIS was rising up, I'm like, send me back over there. You know what I mean? Like, we're always going to have that in us too.
Yeah.
But the other side of it is just as rewarding. Like, I loved all that stuff.
Yeah.
You know?
No, that's a great point, right? Because and that goes back to the same kind of the mindset, the warrior culture, and that mindset that we're talking about. You know, I remember somebody asked me when you go back over there, and the mission set. Those that don't recognize that every time that you're also going back, as you've had multiple deployments, that the left and right limits and the conditions on the battlefield have changed, and you can't approach it the way it was in the previous rotations. And so when we recognize that, hey, we had a partner force, and you had to truly see them as a partner. You know, you had to, you know, endear yourself to what they were saying was, hey, this is the way we need to solve this. And listen, not like, hey, stand back, like we'll let you know when we're done. And you were actually like putting deposits in the love bank to build a relationship, you know. And it's something toward the end, as I was going through this, you realize it's the same thing that you got to do when you're back here. So at some point I'm going to ask for a deposit, you know, and you know this because that deposit, you know, for a leader to a soldier can be what I'm teaching you, right? It could be a skill set, but it also could be something that you're challenged with personally, you know, taking the time to help you with finances, taking the time to work through some challenges in relationship. Because at some point I'm going to tell you, I need your assistance to focus on this now. but you're going to know. And that's kind of like the deposit. It's like when I call my wife and I'm like, hey, I forgot this at the house. Can you like stop everything you're doing? This is more important to drive this one thing here to me right now. And those are like big deposits out of the lug bank,
For
right?
sure, yeah.
Or big withdrawals out of the lug bank.
Hopefully you have enough capital.
That's exactly right. So, well, I really appreciate, Greg, that you came out here. You got a chance to walk around our footprint, see what we're about, and a little bit about our culture. And I'm impressed. I thank you for your service. You know, not just for your time serving in the Ranger Regiment, but even just going back as a contractor, finding another way to still, give back and make a change, and doing something bigger than yourself, and then serving up there at the Port of Seattle. And those that are going to be familiar with you and what you've done on social media and all that. And sometimes, as Ryan Holiday has said, the obstacle is the way.
Exactly.
I think that what you've shared and offered with us today is a lot of things that our team is going to be able to. It's going to resonate with them.
That's awesome. Well, I appreciate you having me. Like I told Nick, if you ever want me to come down, I can help run some jiu-jitsu stuff.
Absolutely.
I would love that. I would love to come down and just give back a little bit. And like I said, try and get guys on that path, and then hopefully we'll get Andy down here and do it again.
Yeah, that would be great. We always tell our listeners, we leave them with what are your questions, but I'm going to leave the final word with you.
Hey, that's all I got, I don't have some profound closure to wrap this up, but at the end of the day, it's cool that like-minded people are getting together, sitting down, having these discussions, because if there's one person somewhere that's going to take a little nugget out of the last 2 hours we just did, and it benefits them as a soldier or as a person, personally, professionally, that's what this is all about. So
Absolutely.
Every time I'm invited to do it, I'm excited to give my time.
Well, we appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much.